All right.
And welcome to the program today. You know me, Steve Cordle, from Talking on WITY. And if you're joining us by YouTube or Facebook, welcome. And if you're on Facebook or on YouTube, rather, if you wouldn't mind hitting the subscribe bar and then the notification bell. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and be sure and share these videos. Gary Barrett is joining me today, and we're going to talk about the resurrection. It's kind of a seasonal event that's going on with Christians around the world. And most of you know me. I grew up in Alaska. I'm a graduate of the Bear Valley Bible Institute, and I've been preaching since 1994, so I've been around a while. And Gary, a little bit about you.
A little bit about me. I graduated from Harding University in 2007, the Bachelor of Ministry degree. I then went on to the grad school. I guess now it's called Harding School of Theology in Memphis. Got my Master of Divinity degree in 2012. Have worked kind of off and on here previous years as a kind of a part-time associate minister. I'm kind of looking for something right now more full-time, but just trying to find whatever ways I can to do ministry and be involved in ministry, whether it's teaching or leading singing, leading worship, whatever I can do. So,
okay. Well, I thank you for joining me here today to have this discussion. Now, we had a couple of areas we kind of wanted to go over. And one of the things that I want to start off with, and I had forgotten to put this, I told you before we started filming, on the list, but let's talk a little bit about the purpose. Why did Jesus have to go to the cross in the first place? Because I'm hearing a lot of blowback now from especially the more left side of the spectrum that either the atonement was not the reason he went to the cross, or it was just some kind of human abuse to send him to the cross. But there was a purpose for it.
oh, sure. I'm kind of not solely. Maybe I'm very trying to be careful with my words.
I understand.
But kind of at the center of it is our inability to do for ourselves what Jesus went to the cross for. That and a lot of this goes back to just the idea of the need for salvation. That we have sinned against God, that we are in need of deliverance from that sin, from that judgment, and thus Jesus comes to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. And I think that I guess I'd be interested to know more about kind of the arguments against an idea of a necessity of an atonement, or that was the purpose. I don't know if you had anything else as far as what you had read.
Yeah, if I had been thinking
ideas.
a little bit further ahead, I would have brought some of those. But I can maybe we can get some of those and have a discussion about that another time. I think part of the problem with people accepting it is we have a hard time. For starters, we have a hard time accepting divine perfection. In other words, God has a standard of perfection. Anytime a sacrifice was offered, it had to be perfect. And so I think there's a problem with that. Another thing is we tend to want a God in our image.
Yeah.
In other words, so if I think that a certain behavior or activity is okay, then God must think it's okay. Therefore, there shouldn't have to be a price paid for that sin. Or that shouldn't even maybe be a sin. But if God is loving and merciful, then he should just accept me as I am and there shouldn't be any price paid for it. But divine justice doesn't work that way. Right. I see it as God is loving and merciful, but the other side of that coin is the justice and the judgment had to be satisfied, and the righteousness, which is why Jesus had to go to the cross. Now, as far as going into the actual events that day when he went to the cross, and we looked at expectations after it was all over with. He's in the tomb. What were the disciples thinking? What were they expecting when like the women went out to the tomb that morning?
Well, it's from the disciple standpoint. I think it's interesting because you see their reactions all throughout when it's happening throughout the trial, the arrest, the trial, um, when the crucifixion happens. You see this, and I think it's interesting also, and this might be too much for this discussion, but looking at their reaction to and understanding of what Jesus is trying to tell them throughout the entire gospel. I always think because I took a class on Gospel of Mark when I was in grad school, and that kind of fixed Mark for me as like one of my favorite of the Gospels. Not trying to play favorites, but we all have
I've got my
our
favorite
books
books
and
topics,
Gospels and whatever.
Yeah.
So, but I always loved the kind of the picture of them in Mark as just not getting it. They just, even after Jesus in Mark 8, 9, and 10, when he talks about, I have to go do this. The Son of Man is going to be delivered up, and he's going to be crucified, and then he's going to raise. And they just didn't understand it. They just couldn't quite put two and two together for some reason. And so then to take all that into account and then to see their reaction from the arrest to where they all run away, and the trial where some of them kind of watch from a distance, and then when people press them, Peter denies him, and then at the crucifixion itself, where they're nowhere really to be seen, they certainly seem to have a sense of everything is doomed, more so than this is a thing that is a precursor to something greater. It's more of, where do we go from here? I guess what we thought was going to happen isn't going to happen now because our leader just died. Mm-hmm. And so now where do we go? We're kind of lost at this point.
I see it as one of the great evidences in favor of the resurrection is the fact they were expecting him to still be in the tomb when they got there.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're going out there with spices, basically to embalm him, and to put it just in kind of in modern plain English. And they're not going out there with the idea of, hey, we're going to find the tomb empty, and we're going to have this great and glorious celebration, right, and kids are going to go hunting eggs because of it. They're going out there, it's very solemn. Years ago, I was reading sort of a narrative of picturing them leaving the house. It's still dark, and it's just getting light, and as they're going, they're passing these crosses. And there might have been more that day. There could have been more than 3 people crucified that day. We really don't know. We just know the 3 for sure. So if you just picture the 3 there, and that middle one is the one that he was on, and they're maybe talking a little bit about that and thinking, this is, disaster.
Right.
And then they get past that, and then they start to think, okay, what are we going to do about that stone? That's their line of thinking. They're not expecting him to be resurrected. And to me, that says there's one point in favor of the resurrection, is their expectations.
Yeah. These are not... A number of these things that are recorded are not things that would be recorded by people who are trying to put the best possible spin on the events that happen. And I guess I was talking, I guess, more specifically about the apostles before.
Well, they were in hiding. There's
when we get to the tomb on Sunday morning, they're not even there. They're right. Not. Now the women saw what happened. The women saw the preparation. I think just about every gospel records that, where it makes a point to specifically mention the women saw his body being prepared and being put in the tomb, and things like that. Now the women did not see, because in Matthew it talks about on the Sabbath is when the leaders go to Pilate and say, the followers are going to come and take the body unless you do something about this. You need to make sure that this is guarded well so that they don't. Because we remember what he said. To me, they remembered what he said. The disciples, not so much.
Isn't that kind of ironic? Isn't that the main epitome of irony?
Yeah.
They believe it's at least possible he could rise. The disciples say, "Oh no, it's all over."
Yeah. Well, they at least believed that somebody might remember that he said he was going to rise, and they might do something about that.
Yeah, somehow that body could disappear.
Somehow that body might not be in the tomb.
Yeah.
On Sunday or on the first day of the week. So we need to make sure that because even in his death, he was still a threat to their establishment, to who they were and what they wanted to be. And so, the women going to the tomb, they expected that they needed help to roll away the stone, and it mentions that as well. That they're talking amongst themselves, like, who's going to roll away the stone? Maybe more hopeful than expecting. I don't know that they expected to see guards there. They weren't there when the deal was made for the guards to be put there. That was on the Sabbath, and they were assuming they weren't much of anyone on the Sabbath.
Privy to that, or the other disciples.
Which is also kind of impressive that the religious leaders on the Sabbath go out and make this shady, underhanded deal to try and have the tomb guarded. I don't know. They just didn't feel like keeping it as strictly that day, or something.
Yeah,
but
special circumstances.
Yeah, I guess desperate times call for desperate measures, as far as that kind of stuff goes. But
now the men, like the women, were in hiding, and that's another, I guess, sort of a offshoot of the women going to the tomb. Is if I'm expecting my leader to be arisen, I'm going to be out there looking for him. But if I just saw him get executed, and I know that there are others out there looking for me because I'm associated with him, I'm keeping a low profile.
Yeah. And that even goes back to the trial, where you saw signs of that, where Peter is having to, because it wasn't even the leaders who were pointing out, like, oh, you were with him. It was just like random people that were saying, I remember you were one of his followers, and so on and so forth. And he has to vehemently deny that he has anything to do with this man, because he's afraid of the consequences. This guy is about to be killed, and so I need to do whatever I can to not be too closely associated with him. But yeah, once you see the aftermath of this man was crucified on a cross, and knowing that there are people out there who know your connection, because this wasn't a ministry done in private for 3 years. This was something that was well known.
He was very public about it.
Jesus was very public, and by association, everybody else who followed him that closely was very, very public as well. So knowing all of that, and just kind of human nature, which plays a big part in all of this, that it's not surprising then that they would be in hiding, that they would be fearful of the potential consequences. And I also thought it was kind of interesting when he reveals himself post-resurrection to the disciples. I think it's in Luke. And then he talks a few verses later, says 8 days later, the disciples were all together in a locked room. I was like,
okay, yeah, they're still in hiding.
They've seen him post-resurrection, and he's come to them to assure them that he's risen and all that. And then 8 days later, they're still very afraid for their lives.
I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. They're still very afraid, and they're still in hiding. And I'm just wondering, is there like a manhunt on? Because by now they know the tomb's empty. The Jews, the Jewish leaders, and Pilate. So I'm wondering, is there not some kind of a manhunt on for his disciples so they can bring him in and say, okay, what'd you do with the body?
Yeah, I don't know.
That would be my first, keeping in mind too, they bribed the soldiers.
Right.
So the soldiers are going to be saying, we fell asleep and they took the body and that sort of thing. So I can see where, okay, people are saying we took the body, we don't know anything about this body. here again, I'm keeping a low profile. I'm not going to be out advertising. I'm putting on a disguise to go to the market and get groceries or whatever, or I'm paying some kid to go do it, but I am not getting out there where I could be myself thrown in jail because they didn't respect due process and those kinds of things that we like to think of today. Now, when this started to get around, when they started to accept it, and I'm starting to go towards John's account now where Thomas
Yes.
is there. And there is a belief among some various religious groups that it was a spiritual, not a physical resurrection. But I've noticed that I can't think of a single one of them that will go and talk about Thomas, where Jesus said, here, look, touch me, and put your hand here.
Yeah.
To me, that says it was a physical resurrection. It's not just a spiritual one. And the physical resurrection and him coming out of the tomb is really what we needed to show the victory over death.
Right. Yeah, it's meant to be a very holistic thing. It's not just singular aspects of anything. It's that we are redeemed, mind, body, just the whole package. I mean, Jesus didn't come just in spirit form and live a life. He came very much to this earth, became just like us in every way. And so I think it would stand to reason that he would then be resurrected just like us in every way. That in order for our selves to be redeemed, holy, I think that would almost be necessary.
Well, and when one other thing that Jehovah's Witnesses go to this because they think he came back with a different body. When I think it's in John's account where they're fishing and it's just getting light, and he's either 100 yards or 300 yards. I forget the distance, but he's out there. Let's just say 100 yards. That's closer. It's just getting light, and he calls to them. They don't recognize him.
Yeah.
Now, to me, it's a pretty simple explanation. It's still somewhat dark. I'm not expecting, once again, they're not expecting him. And then they figure out who it is, and that's when Peter jumps in and runs ashore. Right. Now, I've thought, okay, let's go over here to the football field. You stand at one end zone. I'll stand in the other at daylight, just as it's getting light. Or even better, you stand there, and I'll have somebody that you know come walking out. Do you think you're going to recognize them from 100 yards when it's barely light?
So it's not that great.
Yeah, well, see, I wear contacts. My eyesight's not that great.
Even when I wear contacts, I'm not sure it's that great. But yeah, and putting aside the idea of a glorified body, or of when we are resurrected and we put on that which is imperishable. And I'm going into a little bit more theological language than maybe we need to, but that we will, what we are raised as won't just be the same old perishable whatever body that we've always had. But putting aside even the discussion of that, but yeah, I don't think that. I guess for those who would question the idea of the necessity of a bodily resurrection, I don't know what exactly they think was because there's a disconnect there then between Jesus and us. Mm-hmm. If it's not something that is meant to include the physical, because that is the entire idea of the incarnation. I mean, it's where it starts there, from the incarnation, that God comes down in the form of Jesus, that he tabernacles with us, he dwells with us physically on the earth, and that he comes to redeem us, not just to redeem us in some kind of intellectual only sense or something like that, but to redeem us wholly, body, mind, soul, all of these things together. And so I don't know if that's meant to be as like a hedge or a guard against something. I'm not sure. But
I sometimes think that as humans, we have a hard time with the spiritual.
yes,
Because
definitely.
everything we do is physical.
Yes.
Okay, this table's physical, you and I are physical. This window over here with all those trees and those cars going by, that's all physical.
Mhm.
We start talking the spiritual, now we're getting into things I can't see. I can't hold the spirit in my hand.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people get, and even in our fellowship, we get afraid of the spiritual. We get
Yes.
afraid of the spirit. And so now I've got to somehow take sin, which is more of a spirit. It's physical and it can be spiritual. You know, if you know, particularly when Paul talks about sexuals, that's a physical sin, but it's spiritual because it cuts you off from God in the spiritual
Right.
sense. Okay, you don't repent of it. That's a spiritual
Right.
issue. But when I get into the spiritual, I can't touch it. I can't see it. I can't taste it. I don't know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is where I think a lot of atheism and things come from, is because if I can't see it, then it must not exist. And that's how I'm going to justify it in my own mind. And so when we come to the Bible, we come to Jesus resurrecting and our spirit, now I've got to deal with eternity. And that, I think, is probably the toughest concept for humans to understand.
Any being existing in time,
Well, anything.
trying to comprehend the concept of
We Americans, in our culture,
so
we
much
live by
time.
the clock. We live and die by the clock.
yeah.
You know, I've minored in history and taught it. That is why the Japanese knew when to hit Pearl Harbor, was the clock. Sunday morning, where's everybody going to be?
Sure.
Off duty, sacked out, sleeping in. That would be the best time to hit us. And so we do the same thing. Okay, I start work at 8 o'clock, I finish at 5. I take vacation at this time. This podcast we're doing here, we got about 6 more minutes left on. We know it's going to end. But eternity, even thinking of being with a loving God for eternity, is hard for me to grasp and wrap my brain around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we're afraid of as humans. We get afraid of that. Now, in the time we have left, I want to sort of segue a little bit into the resurrection, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, because we need to talk a little bit about salvation. What does that have to do with me today? Why is it important for me today? And I specifically wanted to look at that in tying Romans 6 and 1 Corinthians 15 together. Because Paul says, when we talk about baptism, I have had people tell me that they go to 1 Corinthians, where Paul says, I declare to you the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, and in which you stand, by which you also are saved, if you hold fast the word which I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you first of all that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. They'll look at that and they'll say, well, there's no baptism there, therefore it's not part of the gospel, therefore we don't need it. And I tie that into Romans 6.
Yeah. But boy, especially in our fellowship, baptism certainly holds a large place. It's very identifying. I won't say trademark. That seems a little more to exclusionist to us. Other people certainly practice believers' baptism, but yeah, the significance of baptism as an identifying act, that we identify ourselves with Christ, specifically identify with ourselves with Christ in his death, that we are buried in baptism, and then just as Christ is raised, or was raised, excuse me, so then we too, when we are raised, he was raised to life, so we also are raised to life. There's a very I was about to say symbolic. In some sense, yes. I don't want to give the impression that it's not very meaningful, but very much a purposefulness to it. That there's a very real connection between what Christ did for us and then how we kind of imitate that through baptism, and how we clothe ourselves with Him, that we draw close to Him, identifying with Him in that act.
Yeah.
I think it's very significant.
I think it is too, and how in Romans chapter 6, Paul says that's when you died to sin, your old way of life.
Yes.
So your old way of life should not have any more effect on you. The story I like to tell is we were at a funeral. My daughter was about 3, and she was trying to see, we were doing the go by the coffin, before the funeral at the viewing.
Right. Yeah.
And we were there, and there was a big line, and she was standing up trying to see in, so I picked her up. She looks in, and then she turns to me and said, "Is she asleep?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I said, "Well, you could say that." "Well, wake her up."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, it's not that simple.
Not quite.
Yeah, but that person in the coffin, you can't. Set off dynamite. They're not going to wake up.
Right.
We can't affect them. And I look at baptism, it should have that same effect. Okay, I've just come out of the water. I've died to that old way of life. It should have no effect on me. I realize in reality it doesn't work that way, that we still have sins and our bad habits and and whatever that are going to try and pull us back.
Right.
But that, when you look at it, death is pretty final. It is a breaking point. Mm-hmm. And our baptism should be that way, where I am now a new person, a new creation. Yeah. I'm starting over. God has given me this clean slate. I am now a child of God, and I need to move forward. Right. Which is where we need to follow up and to embrace our new brothers and sisters, and not just turn them loose to go back into that old way of life. Mm-hmm. Because when they do go home and they tell their kids, their spouses, "Hey, I've become a Christian," they're not going to get it.
Right.
When I was baptized and I was in university, I went to class the next day. Those non-Christians, they were still my friends, but they didn't get it. And it took a swing. We had a few studies with them, won some, lost some, and that kind of thing. But as we are just about a minute or so left, I want to encourage anyone listening to us on the radio, or if you're on YouTube, study this out for yourself. Don't just take my word for it or his word for it, because we went to Bible school and we've got pieces of parchment that says we're educated.
There's plenty there still to go to mull over that we didn't get to.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more.
Any number of things that we mentioned.
Yeah. If you have questions, if you're on the radio, you can send them to us at the eastparkcfc@gmail.com. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, leave a comment in the comment section below, or you can private message us through the YouTube or the Facebook pages. Thank you for watching us. We hope everybody has a good Easter. Now go take on the week.